And I want you to meet somebody who spent his entire career fighting forced unionism. I want to go over some of the things that the privileges and the plan for people who are working in unions and don't want their money spent this way, and what they can do.
In this case, Glenn, the solution is very, very simple. You know, we have a private organization in this country that has been granted privileges beyond anybody's wildest dreams as it relates to union officials in this country. And I'm not talking about rank-and-file workers. We're not talking about hard-working Americans. There is a growing chasm between America's workers and union officials who have been granted this power.
But they all say the same thing. They all will say, because I talk to them. I talk to cops all the time. Guys, your union is in bed with the AFL-CIO in California, and they are teaching anti-cop stuff. Your unions are in bed. They'll all say, no, that's not my union. No, that's the union leaders, and they're all corrupt, and we know that. How do you convince them that the leadership matters?
Well, we try awfully hard, and certainly using avenues like this and talking about the topic of union violence and the special privilege that union officials have there is one of those things that make people stop and shake and say, that can't be true.
Tell me about Richard Trumka, because he has kind of a sordid past.
Well, indeed he does. As the president of the United Mine Workers Union, one of the most violent unions in the country, Richard Trumka just had complete disdain for workers that were trying to stand up for their own rights. For example, the story of Eddie York. In 1993, Eddie York was on his first day on the job at the Ruffner mine in Lenore County, West Virginia. There was a strike going on at the mine. Eddie York wasn't working at the mine. He was working at cleanup. On his first day of job, he tries to drive home. Gunshots ring out. Eddie York is hit in the head. His truck overturns on the side of the road. Eddie York's dead while people went to try to provide aid to him. Rocks pelted down from union miners. Everyone knew who shot him. Everyone knew it. And yet, Eddie York, his death, his 3 children, and now his wife are left without a husband. And when Richard Trumka was asked about this in September of 1993 in a Virginia Pilot story, he said, if you strike a match and you put your fingers in it, you're likely to get burnt. In the context of Eddie York's death. Now, that's the kind of just absolute abuse of privilege that we just can't stand in this country. And believe it or not, Glenn, union officials in the country are exempt from federal prosecution for acts of violence that are used to achieve legitimate union objectives.
Excuse me, say that again?
Yeah. Under a 1973 Supreme Court decision, the U.S. Supreme Court said that union officials were exempt for coordinated campaigns of violence used to achieve legitimate union objectives. That means that if they're out there trying to get a pay raise, if there's a strike...
How the hell did that happen?
Well, it was a case coming out of Louisiana. 3 guys were using a high-powered rifle shooting out transformers of a utility company, and they went after the union officials because union officials were encouraging them to do these types of things. For example, in 1990, right here in New York, the the Daily News strike, a columnist for the Daily News goes to a union hall and he hears a union agent speaking about burning trucks. He says, the union agent says, whatever you do, stop the trucks. Don't let them deliver newspapers, and if you want to burn the trucks, go ahead and do it. But remember what the firemen from Brooklyn told us. Leave the doors open because they burn faster. These are the types of attitudes that we have, that destruction of property, personal injury, even beatings and bombings and murder are just tools of the trade.
How concerned are you about what's happening in Wall Street? Because SEIU is helping coordinate that thing, and they're doing it all over. And it's anarchists, communists. I mean, these guys are not to be trifled with.
Well, that's right, and they know how to use it. In fact, workers. One unnamed union militant was talking in a Washington Post story in 1997. He said, violence is necessary because the people that don't come back are the people that get beat up. So, they use violence as a tool to impose their will on America's workers.
So, show me here the union privileges. These are the things that nobody else has, but the unions have these, right?
That's right.
Okay.
First and foremost, Glenn, the most important thing, and this is what is the predicate for all the things they do. They have a government sanction to have you fired if you don't pay them a monthly union due, a union fee or a union stipend. They can have you fired from a private sector job. They're the only private organization in America with the privilege of forcing you to pay them as a privilege of working.
Vanderbilt University can't even, the Christian Club can't even say you have to be a Christian to be a board member of the club.
Yeah.
But they can have you fired from a private organization if you don't pay them.
That's right. In 28 states today, a worker can be fired simply for failing to pay dues or fees. 22 states have right-to-work laws on the books which protect us from compulsory dues. But this is a federal law that was passed in 1935 during the Roosevelt New Deal era. It comes right out of the era that you know so much about and have talked so much about. This power was granted. The federal government took the states' rights to manage labor-managed relations, brought them back to Washington, created a National Labor Relations Board, which you also know a lot about, and gave union officials the privilege of extracting dues as a condition of employment from America's workers.
Yeah, I don't know as much about it as Boeing does, but if that's not one of the biggest tragedies, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Okay, 2.
The exemption from prosecution, we talked about that, the Edmunds decision in 1973.
Okay, number 3, exemption from anti-monopoly laws.
That's correct. The Clayton Antitrust Act, they're 1914, they're exempt from that. So they can go ahead and form cartels and monopolies and stop people from competing with them because they're exempt from antitrust laws.
Number 4, power to force employees to accept unwanted union representation.
Absolutely. That's another creation of the 1935 labor law where they say, I can represent you even though you don't want me, didn't ask for me, and don't believe anything that I don't believe anything you want.
That's taking away your agency.
That's correct.
You have no free agency. Evil, America. Evil. When somebody takes away your free agency, it's evil. Call it by its name. 5, unlimited, undisclosed electioneering.
That's right. They can use general treasury money to communicate about politics with union members. And now with the new Citizens United case, they can use general treasury money to basically talk about electioneering to America. This is dues money that's extracted from workers who must pay it as a condition of their employment. And then they can turn around and use it for causes and political candidates that those very same workers would oppose.
Government funding of forced unionism.
That's right. This is an area where we really don't know the depth of this. But Glenn, in 1995, when there was a change in Congress, we went in and we examined the Federal Awards Assistance Data Service Act, which is a database created for congressmen to let them know what kind of federal grant money is going to their district so they can take credit for it. We just scratched the surface and we found over $1 billion in federal tax money that was going to organized labor from places like the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, the Department of Housing, and we just scratched the surface. And so the money they collect from workers is fungible. They can use that for all these other things, but the government's sending them over $1 billion in 1995
oh my gosh.
In taxpayer money.
Can you even imagine what that is now? Why can we get in and find that now? How do we get in?
I'm not sure that once we bought the database, I think it disappeared. We kind of caught them by surprise.
All right. Now let me go through the action plan for union workers. This is for people who you may know that is a union worker or you are a union worker. You can do these things.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Every worker in America has the right to resign from the union. The union can't ask you to formally join their union. In a case back in 1961, the Supreme Court, in a moment of bright light, said, you know what? We probably can't force you to be a formal member of a union, but we can make you pay up to 100% of dues to keep your job. So you can't be forced to be a member of the union, but you can still be forced to pay dues or fees.
Okay, but if you're giving them money, what difference does it make?
Well, that's right. But here's the problem with that, is even though if you resign your union membership, then you can't vote in union elections. You can't vote on the contract that governs your terms and conditions of employment. Labor law is stacked against independent-minded workers, and it has been since 1935.
So that really isn't a good idea to do.
It's not really, but if you want to object, in order to get your money back for politics, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, how you get a rebate back for political causes that you disagree with, you have to resign your union membership. So on one hand, you have to give up your workplace rights to exercise your political rights.
Is there anything somebody told me that you can take your union dues and you can pay them to a charitable cause. Yeah. Is that true?
Well, it's true, Glenn, and that was a case we litigated on behalf of workers. Our Legal Defense Foundation has set the precedent in that area, but the union has to agree to the charity. You can't give it to a charity of your choosing. They give you a list and say, these are the acceptable charities. If you want to do that, you've got to give it to a charity that we endorse.
That's crazy. How do you do it, America? How do you go to a union job every day? I don't know how you do it. Okay, number 2, no employee in the U.S. can legally be required to be a full dues paying formal union member. That's what we just talked about.
Talked a little bit about that, yeah.
Number 3, employees covered by the state right to work laws can't lawfully be required to pay any union fees to keep their jobs. We just did that
correct.
one. And number 4, union member who wants to work during a strike should resign from a union membership before going to work. What's that?
Right. Well, that's very important, Glenn, because union officials can discipline workers who cross picket lines. In fact, we represented some Teamster truck drivers in Chicago who were fined $40,000 apiece for going to work. And so it's very important that if you want to work, you don't agree with what the strike's about, before you cross a picket line, which is a dangerous thing in and of itself, as we've learned from the instance of union violence, you need to resign union membership, because then, if you don't, you can be subject to internal union discipline in what is kind of a kangaroo court that finds these workers. We've had nurses from Minnesota fined $20,000, $30,000 for crossing a picket line.
I have to tell you, none of this sounds optimistic. How do you break the back? What is the grassroots way for people to organize and break the backs of these guys?
Well, let me tell you what's happening here, Glenn. Thanks to you and literally others of media outlets across the country, the issue of forced unionism is coming into the popular domain. I mean, the Wisconsin fight back in the early January and March and April, that brought a whole new awareness to people about the power of unions over their government and how the cost of government and the size of government is influenced by union monopoly. The right to work issue is starting to be talked about a lot. In the debate on Tuesday night, the second question was about, to the Republican candidates, would you support a national right to work law that would enforce unionism? Things are beginning to happen. As I mentioned, the chasm between rank-and-file workers in America and union officials is growing wider and wider as union officials get more involved in this crazy stuff like what's going on down the island.
Good. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.